I know no one will listen to me, but please come in front and occupy the front rows. It's my duty to say that. Okay. Can we please close the doors so we don't have noise coming inside? Thank you. So first of all, thank you so much, all of you. I know it has been a long day, and right now we are at the last session for today, not the last session for the conference. We still have another day to go. But I promise all of you that this session will be very exciting because this session is not a regular research conference session. This is the first time in Delivering for Nutrition Conference for Implementation Research that we have an actual chef joining us. And he will be talking about Beyond the Plate, exploring dietary diversity and its broader benefits through India's culinary heritage. So with utmost pleasure, I would like to invite Chef Zach, who's a chef with over 15 years of experience working in award-winning restaurants like the 3 Michelin-starred Le Bourdieu in New York and as chef partner at the iconic Bombay Canteen in Mumbai. In April 2022, he founded the Locavore, a visionary platform championing local food and sustainability in India with the ethos of doing good through food. The Locavore transcends traditional culinary boundaries, promoting sustainable practices, thoughtful consumption, and the celebration of food's cultural significance. Through storytelling, events, partnerships, and projects like the Wild Food Project and the Millet Revival Project, Chef Zach is revolutionizing India's food ecosystem through the Locavore. Can we have a big round of applause for Chef Zach? And I invite you on the stage. Chef Zach will be giving a talk for 25 minutes, which will be followed by a moderated discussion, but we'll get to that later. Hope you enjoy the talk.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is a far cry from what most of you have been seeing over the last 24 hours, I'm sure. Before I begin my presentation, I want to start with a little activity. I've noticed that energy levels are down. So the first thing I'm going to request you to do is to all stand up, please. Indulge me. And how this is going to work is in the slides that follow, there are going to be statements that are showcased. And with each statement, I want you to reflect a little bit very quickly because we don't have time. If you agree with the statement, you remain standing. If you don't agree, you sit down. Are we ready? A little more energy. Are we ready? Yes. Okay, that's better. Okay. In the past week, bought my veggies at the local food market. Anybody? All of you have bought veggies from a local food market? Okay, so people are slowly sitting down. Honesty is very important. Okay. With the next statements, if you agree with them, you can come back standing, and if you don't, you can sit down. In the past week, cooked with or ate a vegetable that was local and seasonal. I don't mean vegetables like avocado, which are seasonal. I'm talking about something that's only available at this time of the year and not before. Okay, that's a good portion. In the past week, ate a meal that didn't involve white rice or processed wheat. Okay. Still a healthy number of people who haven't. Never judge someone for their food choices. Never judge someone for their food choices. Come on. Okay, never been judged for my food choices. All of you sitting have never been judged for your food choices. Go back and think about your childhood. It could be judgment from your parents as well. And finally, often think about how nutrition connects to climate, livelihoods, and culture. Yeah? Okay, great. So thank you for being a participative audience. For my talk today, I wanted to take you on a journey beyond the research papers, beyond the statistics, beyond the reports, beyond the successes. Not to say that those are not important, but I want us to step away for a bit and think about expanding the scope and the worldview and the narrative of nutrition. First, I'm going to tell you about my story. I grew up in Kerala, and I fell in love with cooking because of my grandmother. I spent a lot of time in her kitchen because both my parents worked, and reflecting now, I can tell you that I ate very well. A lot of really nourishing, wholesome food, highlighting local ingredients. My grandmother was an avid cook. She also experimented. But it was really her ability to transform simple ingredients into incredible dishes that changed people's days, changed the mood in the house, brought joy, brought people together, that really made me fall in love with cooking. This is long before celebrity chefs and cooking shows were a thing. And like most aspiring chefs in South Asia, we are taught and conditioned to believe that Western cuisines are at a pedestal. And very often in our culinary schools, food from our own regions, our countries, are kind of hidden away in the staff cafeterias. And so I went down that path. I went off to study at the Culinary Institute of America in New York, worked at the 3 Michelin-starred Le Bernardin. And for the first 6 years of my career, I was cooking European food. And then I decided, you know what, I've never been to Europe, I've never tasted food from these regions. So I took a 4-month sabbatical, traveled across France, Italy, and Spain, spent all my life savings. And on that trip that covered about 36 towns and cities in these countries, I had a major epiphany. I visited a restaurant called Osteria Franciscana in Modena, which, this is 2013, at the time was rated the best restaurant in the world. And as the chef, Massimo Bottura, comes out to the dining room talking to each of the guests, and as he approaches me, I expect him to talk about some modern technique or molecular gastronomy, and instead he talks about his grandmother. And he talks about how his life's work is to celebrate, honor, promote, and preserve his region's cuisine, which is when it struck me. What am I doing in a foreign country, spending all this time, money, effort, learning their cuisines when I had done nothing to really explore my own? And that trip and that experience really changed my life, turned it upside down, and it led me to the Bombay Canteen. The Bombay Canteen, which opened in 2015, early 2015, was a restaurant that really revolutionized the way urban India looks at Indian food, which until that time, and still in a lot of cases, Indian food is seen as butter chicken, dal makhni, palak paneer, but it's actually so much more. This is, yeah.
The Bombay Canteen is a restaurant that celebrates regional Indian food using local seasonal ingredients through a menu that's constantly changing and trying to innovate on what Indian food is known to be. As a chef and as an individual, I'm someone who's really curious about how things work. And during my entire childhood, I tried to absorb a lot of information around me. And that process has kind of translated into how I function in the kitchen as well. Growing up, I loved to eat, and that's one of the reasons I really became a chef, so that I could surround myself with food, just taste everything around me. And what happened over time, just constantly tasting food around me, was that I was building those flavor memories in my head. Before we opened the Bombay Canteen, my experience in Indian food was extremely limited. I remember very clearly on my first market visit, I saw vegetables and fruits which I'd seen all my life, but I'd never cooked with it before. As a chef, it's really important to appreciate and respect what's grown around me. That was my first real epiphany when it came to cooking with local produce. Right before starting out with creating our menu, what was important for me was to travel around the country. And I vividly remember that first trip. I just took 2 months off and traveled across the length and breadth of the country. I visited about 20 different places, immersed myself in as many food experiences as I possibly can, constantly registering those flavors as I taste them. What I did was connect with local people, try and get my way into people's homes, cook with them in their kitchens, visit the local markets wherever I went, and understand how the cuisine and the culture work together. It was just mind-blowing. I saw things, I saw vegetables, I saw recipes, techniques that I'd never seen before in my life. I didn't even know existed. Suddenly, I realized that as a chef, my purpose became clear, which is that all of these stories, these cuisines, these recipes kind of needed to find its way into a mainstream restaurant menu and kind of get a voice for people to really see, taste, and understand.
Now, I've been continuing to travel. Clearly, I don't look the same anymore. Age has caught up with me. But in the last 10 years, I've now traveled to about 25 states in the country, exploring food, visiting local markets, spending time with tribal communities, going to people's homes, learning from experts, talking to anthropologists. And just last week, I was in a village called Badem in Goa, in the Kotigao Wildlife Sanctuary. And I had a meal with the Velip tribe. And I actually tasted ingredients that I had never tasted before in spite of all of this travel, all of this time spent cooking. And again, it was, a reminder that, here is a community that is still preserving and sustaining a lot of their food traditions. Their food culture is rooted in sustainability, is rooted in balance, highly nourishing and nutritious, and most of all, delicious. This was, I know it looks better, it tastes better than it looks even. And so, as I prepared for this conference, I wanted to reflect and say, what can I, as a chef, bring to you that kind of takes from my experiences over the last 10 years. So these are my observations from thinking about cooking, tasting, traveling as a chef on the road for the past 15 years. When we opened the Bombay Canteen in 2015, we realized that we wanted to change people's perceptions and change the narrative around Indian food. And I had a self-imposed rule that I wouldn't use anything that's local or that is imported or non-indigenous. And by virtue of that, highlighted a lot of local, really local vegetables. And the typical response was, why would I come to a restaurant and pay money to eat this? And I'm sure that this resonates with you because I've seen this and heard this across time and time again across my time traveling across India. And yet, if you go abroad, if you go to the West, if you travel around Europe, you'll see that they celebrate and really cherish and respect their own local ingredients. They don't shy away from them. I'm preaching to the choir here, but we all know that our farming systems are really vulnerable. But it's not just these major climatic events that make the news that matter. It's also smaller things. I've spoken to farmers whose entire crops have been damaged by just a few unseasonal rains. In this book, Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino, he talks about how we are at a pivotal moment in our food history and a race against time to save diversity. I'm going to read an excerpt from this book. Since the dawn of agriculture, humans have domesticated around 6,000 plant species for food, but now just 9 provide the bulk of our calories, and 4 of these, wheat, corn, rice, and soy, supply roughly 2/3 of that intake. Despite the huge genetic variation found within these crops, just a few varieties of each are selected to be grown in vast monocultures. We've created a highly productive but incredibly fragile food system. By narrowing the genetic base of the global food system and focusing on highly productive but increasingly uniform crops and animal breeds, We have increased our vulnerability to the impacts of climate change, extreme temperatures, more virulent outbreaks of disease, droughts, and erratic rainfall. By replacing diverse diets with standardized ones, we've created a paradox, a world where food is both abundant and profoundly insecure. We've removed an important safety net for our food supplies, diversity. Indigenous farmers and foragers have long understood what modern science is only beginning to grasp. Diversity is nature's way of ensuring resilience. Diversity gives us the options we need for an increasingly uncertain future. For example, when a team of scientists, including water experts, plant breeders, and nutritionists, calculated what would happen if large areas of water-intensive rice cultivation were replaced with millets and sorghum, they found benefits on every level. More dietary nutrients, lower greenhouse gases, emissions, greater resilience to climate change, reduced water and energy use, and all of this could be achieved without losing a single calorie or expanding croplands, they concluded. Now I want to talk to you about a story from the Ramponkers of Goa. This is an indigenous fishing practice which has now been carried on for over 400 years.
Spending time in Goa, I was able to meet Aaron Savio Lobo, who told me about the Ramponkar fishing community of Goa.
The Rampon, the word is a Konkani word. Basically, the idea of the whole Ramponkar is you share your catch with everyone who helps you. So to kind of haul the net in, you need approximately between 70 and 100 people. So you need the village. It takes a village to get a Rampon up.
They take out their boats about a kilometer into the ocean and fish in a traditional, less invasive manner. This particular method doesn't destroy everything in its path like large-scale trawler fishing does.
Sustainability is not just about, how you're hitting the ecosystems, but it's about accessibility to communities, particularly to marginal or poor communities that find it expensive sometimes to buy fish.
Fishing has always been a community thing, especially in Goa. So keeping the tradition alive while also staying away from fishing using big machinery keeps the ocean completely undisturbed. By opting for a more sustainable route, people can have access to genuinely fresh fish, because the truth is that so much of the fish consumed in Goa actually comes from other states.
Now, I've been going to this beach for several years now, and on the left, you see a picture I took in October 2021, and this is something I took a week ago. And again, speaking with Aaron, what I've come to understand is that this is traditionally a practice that until a few years ago, they would go out to catch and pull the nets only a couple of times a month. But today, they do it every day out of desperation. And it's clear that the sea isn't able to keep up. I've also, again, spending time with indigenous tribal communities across India, come to understand that today's generation of parents and grandparents are probably the last bastions of this knowledge, primarily because staying in these villages isn't viable anymore, isn't aspirational anymore, and the next generation, the young generation, is actually forced to migrate to urban areas in search of livelihood opportunities. And you see that across the country in terms of traditional practices slowly disappearing. Food markets, again, across the country are slowly withering away in our era of, 10-minute quick service delivery apps. And in the process, we are also losing sight of, again, what grows seasonally. Our food habits, what we eat, what we cook, is now being decided by larger conglomerates and larger forces around us. Most of us here in this room are probably privileged, but there are marginalized and oppressed communities who really don't get to choose what they eat, who have been stigmatized for what they eat. But you also see it in larger narratives. There's actually an Indian restaurant in Belgium, almost as if to say that what the rest of us eat is impure. This is an incredible book by Dolly Kikon and Joel Rodriguez that talks about stories from the northeast of India tied to food and heritage. And there's a story called Civilizing the Taste Buds about Teki Nimi, who's from Arunachal Pradesh, but the story centers around her experience in the boarding schools in Assam. I'm going to read out from this. My shame unfortunately stemmed from other people's perceptions of tribal cuisine and their assumptions that our food was visually and gastronomically repulsive. It was only heightened by my dining experiences at boarding schools where tribal food was not even deemed a cuisine, let alone served in those large dining halls. Everyday Arunachali food typically consists of rice, seasonal greens with bamboo shoot, and a meat of some kind, fresh, smoked, aged, seasoned with garlic, green chilies, local herbs, and again heaps of bamboo shoot. Predictably, my immediate memory of my time in boarding schools was that of hunger. I was always hungry. This is not to suggest that they were starving or underfeeding us, but rather that the food that was provided to us in abundance was not ours to begin with. I was hungry for Arunachali food. I recall girls strolling around the school campus to collect some ferns, dekia as we call them, and boiling them in our steel bowls over a candle. At some point, the flames from the candle would heat up in the steel, so each one of us would take turns holding the bowl over the flames until we couldn't anymore, before handing it on to the next girl. The cycle would continue until the dekia was properly cooked and our hands partially burnt. At times, we would crave meat. Once, when we expressed a desire to be served some sort of meat dish ever so occasionally, the dining in charge angrily remarked, "I will not serve any non-veg food in my mess. I don't even breathe near people who eat meat." She was at that moment surrounded by hundreds of tribal children whose dietary habits most certainly included meat eating. So, my question to you is, how is it fair that some of us have the freedom to eat while most of our choices, for most, the choices are dictated by others? Now, all of this is stories of doom and gloom, and you'd think one would kind of be defeated experiencing all these through the travels, but for me, I think I wanted to see how I can make interventions in my own way, which is what led me to the Locavore. The Locavore is a platform that is very, very young, started about 2 years ago. And what we're trying to do is to act as a facilitator for change, working and collaborating with people, with organizations, with farmers, food producers, and stakeholders across the food chain to actually bring positive change across our food systems. And we do this through storytelling, partnerships, events and travel experiences, and social impact projects. And the reason why I was able to find the courage to do this was also that across the way, I also came across stories of hope. I came across people and organizations who were actually making progress, taking efforts to impact at the grassroots level. So I'm going to share some of those right now. One, local is starting to become cool again. There's a resurgence in terms of regional food. There's a very gradual movement towards people appreciating the food from their own communities or regions. This is actually a restaurant in Riboy district in a village called Kweng, called the Meramo Cafe. And there are other restaurants like this one where people from the local communities run the restaurants. It's a relatively remote village, but they run the restaurants and highlight local vegetables and produce from that region. And it not only serves the local community, but also attracts tourists, so it's become a very promising economic opportunity for them. We spoke about our vulnerability to climate change. Crops like millets are making a comeback. Again, I'm sure all of you know why millets are relevant to the climate crisis. They're more resilient, they require less water, they require fewer inputs, and they've been a part of our traditional food heritage for a very long time. At the Loco, we're doing something called the Millet Revival Project, where we're using a combination of storytelling, recipes, events, collaborating with publications to actually expand on the conversation around millets. This was actually something we did just a month ago in Bhopal, where we brought farmers from Madhya Pradesh along with people from the city on the same plane, showcased documentaries about their lives, and got them to interact and learn from each other and create a space for dialogue and conversation. This is a platform called In Season Fish, that has been around for 6 or 7 years now. The founder is Divya Karnad, who's a marine conservationist, and In Season Fish basically is working to educate consumers about the what varieties of fish to consume when, and they also do interesting walks across fishing villages to make it more experiential for people. There are also people like Vamsi Mata, who is a Dalit artist who, and you see a lot of these, a lot of people from typically oppressed or marginalized communities who are reclaiming spaces to talk about and bring conversation and attention to their history and their cuisines. We took on a wild food project as the Lokovo a few years ago, working with the same communities, the Kokanis, which I showed you earlier, to document their foods. And we actually created a book which we translated and gifted it back to the communities to hold as a sense of pride. And then we took it one step further. This is a wild food festival that now happens annually in Bombay that attracts people from all over, but brings people from the community as well to showcase their ingredients, their foods, their traditions, and again creates a space for dialogue, conversation, and action. The Lokovo is also working on archiving our food markets, which we've now done across 8 or 9 states in the country, to show that markets are interesting points of our food heritage and culture that need to be preserved. We also work with a lot of food producers across the country who are working directly with rural farmers and working on different aspects of food system issues, whether it's in terms of inputs, whether it's in terms of traditional practices. And I'll finish with again something interesting that came up a few years ago. An organization called NESFAS in Meghalaya, that's the Northeast Society for Agrobiodiversity, reached out to us with a problem statement saying that millet farmers in Meghalaya, even the millet farmers in Meghalaya, are eating fewer millets. And so we investigated and found that the single biggest reason that they came back with was taste, that eating those millets wasn't tasty enough, and so whether it was their children or even themselves, they didn't really want to continue eating millets. So we actually intervened, spent time with them, worked with these farmers to create recipes that are still familiar and accessible, but exciting, nutritious, and delicious, which has hopefully propagated through other families and farmers as well. So to conclude, I think I'd like all of you to think about what does the future of food look like if we only consider nutrition isolation? The journey we've taken today from the fields of Meghalaya to the markets of Goa, from millets to wild foods, reminds us that food is never just about sustenance. It's about stories, relationships, and the intricate balance of nature and human effort. As we think about what lies ahead, let's remember that nutrition is deeply intertwined with the way we grow, share, and experience food. Can we truly shape the future of nutrition without addressing the culture, communities, and ecosystems that sustain it? So I leave you with this challenge. How can each of us contribute to a future where taste, tradition, and sustainability are as central to our food systems as health? Let's expand the narrative of nutrition to embrace the complexity and beauty of the food that nourishes us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chef Zach. Now, to continue the session, I would like to invite the moderator for this session, Shonali Muthale, who's an associate editor at The Hindu, running the Metro Plus and Weekend supplements. A Chevening scholar, she writes and reports on the intersection between food and culture and oversees The Hindu's food vertical, building a product that engages with both diners and the professionals in the culinary space. She also writes on the theatre, art, and travel. Over to you, Shonali, to take the conversation forward.
Thank you, Isha. In keeping with the theme of the conference, which is connecting the dots, a lot of what Locavore does is centered around learning about and recording climate-resilient food practices and food diversity, and then using social media to get younger users and diners excited about this. But for you personally, was this something that you learned about in culinary school, or did it only strike you when you started creating menus for the Bombay Canteen?
I think, like I said, it's not something that we were taught. It's not something that we thought about. When you're a chef, you put on blinders and you're focused on just cooking. But it was really traveling across and discovering that opened my eyes to a lot of this, and also traveling extensively. And what I noticed was that there were a lot of parallels in terms of the food system issues that I was seeing across the country. I could actually kind of take a helicopter view and see those, and there were solutions in terms of what is happening as well. And somehow all of this was happening in their own silos. There was nothing really connecting the dots together, and that's kind of what led me to launch the Locavore.
Chef Zach does an enviable amount of traveling. If you follow him on Instagram, you'll see that. While you're traveling, can you tell us about, and we saw some of it, some of the most delicious and nutritious indigenous fruits, vegetables, herbs that you've eaten?
There's been a lot. I think you saw those 2 tubers there, but there's another one which I came across called soplang in Shillong, which is almost like a water chestnut. There have been interesting ways in which I've come across ingredients. I came across this vegetable called moras bhaji, which is a type of succulent in a market in Mumbai, exactly on the 10 days of the year that it shows up in the market. It's actually a perennial vegetable, but shows up because the Gujaratis replace salt in their diet during the fasting season with that vegetable. There's been, beyond the usual fiddlehead ferns that I've tasted, there's been interesting ferns that I've discovered. In fact, just in Kerala, where I'm from, I came across a fern called tava, which growing up there my entire life I never knew existed. So there's a lot that, I'm still learning and discovering. So it's been a really humbling experience to discover so many different diverse ingredients, and then go back to the cities where unfortunately most chefs use just a handful of the same ingredients, very often resorting to Western vegetables or imported ingredients to show some value in their food.
That said, there has really been a change, and I think that's had a lot to do with how Bombay Canteen proved that local and indigenous food can be very fun, because it's hit the, it's one of the top restaurants in the country, and people are very excited about the food. And we see increasingly a lot of these young, very talented chefs using foraged ingredients. They're working with local produce. Regional food has become popular. As a chef, is this all more difficult to work with?
I think it is difficult to work with because we don't have documentation around these ingredients. Our traditional cuisines aren't really, out there for people to learn from. It's not part of our syllabuses in culinary school. So it's much more difficult because you don't have access to all of it. But it also requires a change of kind of your own stereotypes and perceptions around food. You need to break free from the norms that you've been conditioned to say that, okay, why am I cooking with the same vegetables when even if I go to the local market every now and then, I'll see vegetables that I don't feature on my menu. So it requires that effort, which is what I'm trying to do to bring other chefs along on this journey. And part of that also involves making all of these things cool, aspirational, fun, which is why then events are important, collaborations are important, and it's a slow uphill task.
Yeah, because practically speaking, if you want to use these, because we're always so big on diversity and we're saying we should be eating a more diverse range of fruits and vegetables, but to actually put it on a menu is difficult because it's not going to get it through the year. You're going to have to change your menu constantly. So when you were putting together a menu like the Bombay Canteen, how did you manage to overcome all these things?
So one of the things that I was really particular about, one was that especially when it came to, forest produce, food from indigenous communities, that there is always the risk of some of these becoming popular and exploited, and these communities not getting access to the foods anymore. I often talk about how, you know, the farm-to-table restaurant concept is flawed because it's actually kitchen or chef to farm-to-table. The chefs decide what they want, and the farm grows it for them. What we did with some of these ingredients was to say, you know, go to these communities and say, you consume what you have, what you need, and give us what is in excess, and we'll figure out how to deal with it. It was obviously a lot harder because even the seasonality is really short for a lot of these. But it just means that you have to kind of be more creative, go a little deeper into what these communities eat, and that's what we did. And yeah, I mean, and as I do it, I realize how and why this is not as popular, or other chefs don't take to this.
Talking about communities, your grandmother was a huge influence for you. And when you think about her cooking, was it more environmentally aware than today?
I think so, and I think this is true for, I'm sure all of us sitting here, is that the food from that our ancestors ate, that our grandparents ate, traditionally was more frugal. We made do with what is available. We wasted very little. We cooked with what is available locally and seasonally around us. And that became the primary driver in terms of what we ate. So traditionally, yes, but then you can see that transition happen over the last several decades in terms of, and it could be, I mean, you can tie it to globalization, you can tie it to, you know, how media has kind of made certain things more aspirational than others, how capitalism is now kind of in every aspect of our lives. And we've slowly stayed further and further away over the last few decades.
But there has been a lot of a rise in interest because, you know, for us, we keep getting recipe books now. So many people are recording old recipes. Do you think that that has happened, where there's a change, where people are saying all this information that we have is actually very valuable, and now let's find ways to record it?
It's definitely happening. It's happening slowly, but it's happening for sure. But it's happening in these pockets. I mean, I think you and I are exposed to those microcosms of these little nudges within in terms of trends and movements. Hopefully that it turns into something larger, but that's why I think collaborative effort is needed amongst organizations, amongst restaurants, amongst chefs, amongst experts to kind of keep pushing this movement forward.
Because when you have tried it, customers and consumers have really been enthusiastic. What's the response you've seen as you've traveled, you know, introducing people to millets, introducing people to all these old food traditions? Because you also do a lot of interface with younger people.
Yeah, I think, like if I had to compare between, say, 10 years ago to now, I was faced with a lot more experiences where people said, I'm not going to serve you my food. Why would you want to eat my food? As opposed to now people doing it with a sense of pride. There is a certain renewed attention also from the younger generation to, they're able to see, because they're not as conditioned as we were growing up, they're able to see the value in holding on to retaining this heritage. So I definitely see that the shift happen.
One of the focuses of this conference really has been about increasing, you know, people eating more fruits and vegetables, increasing the diversity in what you eat, and how a lot of this is climate resilient. I think what Chef Zach brings in is also that a lot of this can be really delicious. When you think about the meals that you had this year, for example, can you tell us one or two really great ones that you remember?
I think I shared a few. I think for me, I don't enjoy meals in fancy restaurants anymore. Only because I've been there, I can see through a lot of what they're trying to do, and it's a farce for the most. But when you take a meal like what I had in Goa, for example, and I was talking about this with one of the travelers, we spent about 2 or 3 hours there while they were cooking the meal. I mean, talk about slow food. That was slow food, and there was so much care and attention, and empathy in the effort that they put in, and I think that is often discounted in addition to how delicious these plates are. And I consider myself very, very lucky to have those experiences around the country, ranging from having a meal in village in Goa last week to eating in the Garo Hills like a month before. They're all so diverse, so nuanced. Chefs often forget the fact that, they think of European cuisines as being so advanced and developed, but there's a lot of nuance that I've come to understand and learn about in traditional cuisines as well, which is often lost because you don't look.
And I've been particularly fascinated by Chef Zach's traveling through the Northeast, because I find that the food there is so unfamiliar to so many of us, and that they have really held on to a lot of their traditions, a lot of their traditional food, as a result of which I also find that their diets are a lot healthier. So what are they doing right? And what lessons can we learn?
I think what makes the Northeast part of India distinct from the rest of the country is that it's one of the few parts of the country where indigenous tribal cuisine, food culture and heritage and these tribes are still dominant. And again, my travels over the years have not just been around tribal communities. I've gone to urban parts of the country, rural parts. I've seen so many different aspects of our food system, and I keep realizing over and over again that it's some of these indigenous communities that are really holding on to their traditions, which have been carried on for thousands of years. And it's all been passed down orally, it's been taught to generationally. And again, like I said, they're food cultures which are by default more conscious, they're more, they live in coexistence with nature. A lot of them traditionally worship nature before other religions kind of took shape there, and they carry the knowledge of what to grow when, what to harvest, what food. They look at food as medicine for the most part, and so because I've seen like traditional cuisines and heritage being retained and preserved the most in those regions is what draws me back there, because it reminds me of, or it alerts me to a time that probably was in the rest of the country as well, but that's the last bastion in a lot of cases.
And you also look around a lot of markets, and I remember going to a market in Meghalaya and just finding it incredible, because they also had a lot of those worms, which are also very high protein and all kinds of things. Do you find that the markets in the rural areas are actually have a lot more variety than what you see in our supermarkets, which are mostly avocados, carrots, and beans?
Increasingly, I see diversity disappearing from rural markets as well. And again, many different forces at play, but I mean, it used to be that I would go to these markets in different parts of the country, and that's where I would discover and learn about local ingredients, but that's becoming harder and harder from my travels. It's actually quite sad as a realization for me, but yeah, that's unfortunately not the case anymore.
So do you think there's hope for food diversity? Because with nutritionists and chefs now saying that we should be eating a wider spectrum of fruits and vegetables, people more nutritionally aware. Again, like I think we do tend to be in a bubble where we tend to see people who are more interested in this. But is this the beginning of a change?
I am optimistic, so I'd like to think so. But it requires a lot of us to come together, really. And I think this conference is a fantastic example of how we can do that, because we're sharing knowledge, sharing successes, sharing ideas, and it requires more spaces like this for us to collectively work on reviving diversity, reviving dietary diversity, looking at nutrition beyond the microcosm of just health. And yeah, I'm hopeful.
We'll open this out to questions now, if anybody has any questions. Yes. I think there's a mic over there. Or, yeah, she's got one. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting sharing, and the moderation also, and the observation you shared. I'm Javindra Bandari. I'm from Nepal. I have two very basic curiosities. Number one, I think you also a little bit mentioned about how the indigenous food or the choice for food for people is progressing.
Sorry, I'm not able to hear.
Okay. I would be interested to know how the context of the globalization, modernization, urbanization, and lots of the global change has, influenced the indigenous food and people's choice to food kind of things, and that can be harnessed in future. How can that be harnessed in the future?
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear. Maybe it's just my...
It is not coming? Now it's okay? Sorry for inconvenience. I have two specific curiosities. One is in the context of globalization, the urbanization, and the whole lots of global change. It would be interesting to have your reflections, because you have traveled and you have got a good sense of it. So how that has influenced on the indigenous food practices, the cultural practices, and how can that be better harnessed in future? This is one. And second, as a student of anthropology also, you mentioned slightly that you also visited and took the consultation with the anthropologist. With my own interest, how do anthropologists view in your conversations, in talk, that how the dietary diversity has transitioned or influenced in terms of people's, again, choices, preferences, and based on the local realities? Are there any reflections or observations you could highlight on? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Sure. I might forget.
I think it's easier if you do it one at a time.
To answer the first question, I think what I'm noticing, again, as a reference, I can go back to the last 10 years of my travels. In fact, and going back to some of those places over and over again, is in most cases, what the feeling I'm left with is an impending sense of loss, that things are disappearing, that traditions are dying, that the next generation is not interested. I see those parallels everywhere. And I think one of the things that I keep hearing is that they are not like the next all of this depends on generational knowledge getting transferred. And what I hear is the younger generation finds city life more aspirational. They don't see this as being viable. They don't think their own heritage is, they don't hold a lot of pride or respect for their own heritage. So that is something, and when you think about it, I mean, this would mean that in the next 20, 30 years, you are going to see a complete wipeout of a lot of these traditions and knowledge systems that exist amongst indigenous communities. A lot of it is already lost, and I can sense that it's going to happen on a much bigger scale with the people who are now in their 50s and above passing on. To answer your second question, I think what I'm hearing from, again, anthropologists and experts is also very similar, that they're also seeing this change happen very rapidly, in that as communities, as people, both in urban and rural India, we're shifting very quickly away from traditional systems and traditional models. And then the reasons could be plenty. It again is very diverse in terms of what causes this, but there's a shift that they're noticing.
Thanks.
Okay.
Could everyone keep their questions quick and just one each, because we've got a few to get through. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay. I can't tell you how happy I am here. I can't express. I think, this is the beauty of delivering for nutrition conference. Me and Esha were discussing that after P. Sainath, listening to him, we were not able to think for some hours, like, what are we doing, and, where our lives are heading, and what kind of work we are doing. And similarly, like, with a lot of happiness, gratitude, and hope, I feel that I would be today, at least, after your presentation. So there is no question per se. I just feel that it's very important to stay true to what happens inside you. And your journey was so inspiring and motivates all of us again to reconnect with our true selves and feel you're on this journey of celebration of life. So I'm very happy, and congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. That's such a thoughtful thing to say. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Questions from the standing mic?
Yes. Chef, my name is Olivier. Thank you a lot for your interesting presentation. And I absolutely share your love for homemade, good quality food. In fact, I grew up in Germany in a house where all vegetables and fruits that we eat, and chicken and eggs, were home produced by my mother. So I also know how much work it is, how much work you have to put into that lifestyle. And it is a lifestyle. Now I live in the US. I have to, buy my food wherever in the local market or in the supermarket. So the classical example where you definitely see the difference in the quality is for example, for eggs and tomatoes. These are my two main examples. But nowadays, professionally, I think we are most concerned about feeding an ever-growing population and feeding them as best as we can with reducing land. So I'm wondering, how would you assess, how scalable is the approach that you promote?
I think this is something that keeps coming up in conferences that I attend, in my discussions with people. I think we've been, again, taught to believe that these traditional food systems are not scalable. And a lot of this narrative is shaped by the same large corporations that we are now dependent on for our food. I think that the scalability, first, I think the single most thing that we forget in this is that, for example, when you look at yield in terms of food, whether it's from a monoculture versus, say, a homestead farm, we often think of food as in terms of weight, or when you think about yield. We very rarely think about it in terms of nutrition and value. And I think that's the single most important thing to remember here, is that we need to shift our focus away from how we see the value of food beyond the statistics of yield per hectare, which is how it's been carried on for in recent years. But I empathize with you as well. I wish we all had access to better food, and again, we're all privileged as people that we still get to eat and put food on the table. And we can afford it.
Can I? Okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. I'm Nilufar from Pakistan, and I would like to thank you for taking us through your inspirational journey. I have a question as far as this indigenous food or the meal or the cuisine is concerned. I belong to academia, and a lot of people over here are from academia. And I found that if, as a researcher, we use some of those some of those fruits, vegetables, or food cuisine into a research system, it's an example from moringa. I know my mother used to cook moringa, and we all used to eat. But when I became a mother, I stopped cooking moringa. My children doesn't even know what is moringa. But suddenly, the upsurge of the research in moringa has skyrocketed the use of moringa all over the world. So could we do that with some of the traditional foods, encourage the academia along with the partnership of the many organizations which supports research work to at least propagate the research, because somehow we are very much bound to what is scientifically proven. And my second question is, you said the West Bengal, northeast of India, where they have very good food, and did you see, I mean, do they have any data as far as malnutrition is concerned in that population? It would be interesting to use that as a, you know, sort of a insight into other villages to follow. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that statement about how our worldview as experts in the space is tied to the research that we find, and increasingly we are seeing that, and this is something I briefly alluded to, is that what indigenous communities have been saying for a very long time, you're seeing slowly through studies. It's when these studies come out that we finally acknowledge them. But very often, a lot of these cases, these are stories of resilience, stories of that have been shaped through their own life experiences over generations. So I think, and this is precisely why the topic of my talk was centered around this. I hope that my speech implores some of you to also go beyond and look at how indigenous food systems can be studied, how we can bring some of those stories of resilience and diversity and nutrition to the forefront as well. To answer your second question, the same organization I referred to, NESFAS, works with an organization called TIP based out of the UN, and they've been doing studies over the last 4 years across 4 countries, and they've found that over 80% of the most biodiverse regions in the world are also the same place where indigenous communities thrive. And they've been studying the regions, and I can maybe share, they've actually been able to show through these studies that there is a difference in nutrition in how the traditional food systems there thrived.
Yes. Yeah, hi Chef Thomas, my name is Jasmine. I am from the northeastern region of India. So it made me so proud hearing about the food systems, and actually I came to know about your work when you visited the state of Meghalaya and you visited the South and South Garo Hills. So thank you so much for the representation of our region and our, a little bit of, I just want to add an additional comment to what you mentioned of why indigenous communities thrive, especially in the Northeast region. I think it's an information for everyone. I think during my MPhil thesis, I worked on the idea of the process of cooking. So the reason why a lot of, like you mentioned, it's true, it's oral tradition, and it's thrive because we have this concept of the act of cooking and preparing together. And a lot of our acts, even me as an individual, I came to know a lot of our indigenous food because we like feasting. A lot of Northeastern tribes, we love feasting. So feasting is a very communal act. And it still thrives till today, be it festivals or any kind of family celebration, it thrives. And that is also one way how traditional knowledge and a lot of the recipes also gets passed down. So my question, sorry for taking so long, but my question is basically, like, I really appreciate your work, but at the same time, I also am curious how the communities that you visit also benefit. In the sense, are there any collaboration to write recipes, which are maybe in some form taken into more various platforms as well? That's my question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I agree. I think for a lot of us, cooking has been resolved to a very monotonous act, so as eating. And when you look at it in contrast with the communities that I've spent time interacting with, there's so much joy and pleasure and communal kind of, it changes your experience completely. In terms of my work, I mean, my work in, with these communities, there are multiple efforts across the country, but I'm always trying to make sure that the work that I do keeps those communities at the center. It could be in terms of, say, for example, I now take people on food trips and exploratory trips to these communities. I take a step back from that narrative. I'm just a facilitator. And I'm trying to create more opportunities for this to happen. Even with the wild food zine that, for example, that we created, the idea was actually not so much to create it for, say, people from, say, the cities, but to actually create a document that can be given back to those communities. We spent a whole year translating that from English to the local language, and again, proceeds from that kind of go back to those communities as well. So definitely the intention is there, the efforts are there, and that's what's going to kind of guide me. And that's something that I'm very vocal about, so I hope that even in the work that other people kind of take up, they do the same.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Purnima Menon from IFPRI. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the gendered dynamics that, that exist in kitchens, in the preservation of traditions. I think we've been collecting some data on how women engage across the food system, and over the many years, there's been a lot of work done to bring women into agriculture, to bring women into markets, and the data that we've collected in districts across South Asia shows us that happens. What's not happening is women are still alone in kitchens. Women are still putting in 5 hours more than men are. I think the last time surveys in India demonstrate the sort of the burden on women of, in a sense, preserving traditions, preserving and sort of organizing how food gets onto tables. And there is just simply no way we get to the kind of scale we need on eating healthy, preserving local foods and traditions if we don't have a whole-scale social revolution. And it doesn't have to be a revolution, but a real social transformation in the food system. And so I'm wondering, in your travels, in the way that you've been looking at it, what are you seeing and what's the future in terms of changing the gender dynamics of how we achieve some of the goals of local and traditional eating?
I think all I can do is acknowledge what you said. That's what I'm seeing in my travels as well, that it's very gendered. Even when you think about the Millet Revival Project and millets, one of the biggest factors for millets to kind of fade away in diets is not just the Green Revolution, it's also that millets aren't very easy to process. We never had the technology to process them like we did for rice and wheat. And guess who was milling them? It's the women in the family. And that's a lot of work and effort, almost 6 times the effort that it takes to, say, mill rice or wheat in terms of time spent by these women. So I think I see that through my travels. And unfortunately, that's a very deeply rooted systemic issue that is the shift. I don't see the shift happening at all. So it's something that we all need to be cognizant of in our work, and I try to be.
There are
questions.
Yeah, can we take the virtual questions, because I think our virtual participants have been waiting very patiently. So there are 2 comments and 2 questions. So first, let me just read out the comments. One participant says that very heartening to hear your talk. Are you aware of the first food series published by Down to Earth? I feel we need more talk and networking around similar initiatives to promote local foods and the short value chains. The nutritive value of local foods also needs to be highlighted. That's one comment. The second comment is one of the best session and a great idea to share thoughts and experience of chef in nutrition-related conferences and his traveling and an experience related to food and indigenous food. So this is basically an appreciation for you. There are 2 questions. One is, what sustainable actions do you promote to address climate challenges and meet nutritional requirements? And the second question by the same person is, what strategies can you propose to promote our traditional culinary best practices among young people in the society?
I think both of the questions are kind of tied together. Firstly, thank you for the appreciation. I was very nervous coming to speak with all of you experts and researchers. But it's always nice to share stories. What I've come to discover, and this is what led to the genesis of the Locavore, is that just one approach, say with storytelling, isn't going to work. This needs to be a multifaceted approach through all of these different models that we are tackling, through advocacy, through working with grassroots level organizations, through getting people excited about some of these causes, engaging them through events, taking people to the source of the food through travel experiences, working with foundations, CSR initiatives, non-profit organizations through our social impact projects. It needs to be a multi-concerted effort, and at the same time, there has to be some sort of movement building that needs to happen where you're able to inspire people to come on this journey with you. And that's kind of been the strategy for me. Again, very new on this journey, but that's the journey I'm on.
There's a question there, yeah.
Thanks for this fascinating session. This is Sohana Shafiq from Bangladesh, ICDDRB, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So we have been hearing about internal migration as well as some international forced migration. In Bangladesh, we have the Rohingya communities, or these forcibly displaced Myanmar populations, and they are not being able to keep their cultures and carry on with their traditional cooking. And they're spilling over to the host communities, and lots of confusions are created among them, and tensions are being created. And these political determinants of the environment, of food systems and various systems, and how can we influence our political leaders and the policy influencers on tackling these kind of issues, and so that populations can continue and keep their cultures?
This is, I think, out of my syllabus, but I've found that storytelling can be really powerful. Maybe not in convincing policymakers, but in rallying people to push that message across. That's all I will say to that. But I completely understand what you're trying to say, and it's happening across the country, both in, you're seeing a massive exodus like we see in Bangladesh, but you're also seeing that it also happens in pockets, and it's happening all over the country, which is why I said that, we have to acknowledge that we are privileged to be able to choose what we preserve, what we eat, what we, how we retain our food culture, but many people don't have that luxury, and it's something to be cognizant of just as much as the gender nature of our food system.
There's a question there, yeah.
Amazing presentation. I'm Professor Puri from Delhi University. My feeling is that, indigenous food has become a movement for the well-to-do, the affluent. We have restaurants, and as Chef said, how can we translate this to the grassroots level? And I feel that this food should be made aspirational. A slum dweller kid would love to have a pizza. Can we make indigenous food aspirational for them? Maybe even we have a lot of movement on kitchen gardens and community gardens to grow these kind of indigenous crops and then utilize them into making food which is aspirational. So your suggestions.
That's a fantastic point, and it's something that I'm, again, very cognizant of in my work. One approach that I kind of follow is a lot of the aspiration trickles down from urban India. So if I'm able to bring attention to, and it needs to be done very carefully and delicately, because it's their narrative, not mine. But if we're able to bring attention, like for example, the Wild Food Festival that we did, we've been doing it for 6 years. This past August was 6th edition, where 500 people from Bombay came to attend this festival, and there were about 40 people from the community who were there. And from my interactions and from the organizations we work with, who are working closely with these communities, even something as, like that has actually influenced how they look at their own food culture and heritage. They've been doing wild food festivals in their own, in different parts of the state of Maharashtra as well. So I think one approach is to, again, I mean, this top-down approach, but, and the only reason I do that is because my bandwidth and I have limitations. But I do agree that like there are so many organizations that may not necessarily work directly with food, but work in these communities that can actually make small changes, get the community together to hold events where they kind of share their stories, share their heritage, and involve the younger generation in those activities as well. I think very importantly to place them at the table, give them a seat at the table to be able to have those conversations is really, really important.
We'll take one last question from the mic, yeah. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm Naomi Saville from University College London. I've been working in the remote mountains of Nepal the last 3 decades, and what I've observed is that a lot of people in the past were eating lots of these millets, buckwheat, you know, as you were saying, and now they've just replaced that with white rice. And what we're seeing in Kathmandu now is the sort of elite middle class are buying those millets and buying those buckwheat and products, and they're being exported as cash crops. But the people whose indigenous culture it was to eat those and grow them don't want to eat them. And I've come across some projects that have tried, you know, oh, you can make a buckwheat cake or something, but actually people don't eat cake, you know. We want the recipes that actually are tasty and local and are suited to the local ingredients. I was wondering what tips do you have for us for promoting those kind of consumption of those foods amongst the communities that actually traditionally grow them? Thank you.
So the way, especially with making a lot of this food tasty, delicious, interesting, one, you have to, the way that's presented to them needs to be to show that has value, to give them context to why this is important. What we did again in Shillong, I didn't go there and show them how to make a buckwheat cake. What I did was to understand their food, took some of their recipes and looked at how, you know, you can make small changes, replacing, say, rice with millets in certain cases, or and even how that pairs with the other dishes. I think it needs to be familiar, but still exciting, delicious, nutritious. And just to add to the point, the statement you made, we also have to be cognizant that a lot of these traditional foods are at the brink of being expensive for these communities to purchase and buy as well. So that's also something to keep in mind as we move forward.
Thank you so much, everybody. We're done, yeah. I think I'm not going to wrap up because I think the questions were great and we've gone over everything. So I'll just, Zach, do you want to wrap up?
Thank you for being a patient audience, and I hope there's something to take away from this for all of you.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you, Chef Zach. Thank you, Shanali. I must say our research sessions didn't have so many questions like this session had. So I am sure everybody enjoyed your talk, and we are so thankful that you could come all the way and deliver this talk. And yes, as Pawan said, this is what is the difference between delivering for nutrition with other conferences, that it's not just about research. We also go beyond research, and it's all about connecting the dots. So thank you both so much. Can we have a photo, please?
Thank you.
So with that, we close day 2. Thank you so much, all of you, for patiently waiting throughout the day. Thank you so much for your insights that you gave through question and answer sessions and through the different networking opportunities. I've already started hearing feedback about this conference and suggestions about the next conference, so I think we are on the right track. As we did yesterday, we have a QR code that you can scan and give us the answers of few questions that we ask. As I said, there'll be a prize at the end. And just to remind all our presenters of the thematic sessions, we are also giving away Best Presentation Awards for each session. So all the presenters, we request you to be there in the closing ceremony tomorrow. I know once your presentation is over, everybody likes to, go around. It's a beautiful city, but please, all of you be there for the closing ceremony. The QR code will be up for a minute. You can scan and answer the questions. I would just like to let you know that tomorrow we will start at 9 p.m. like today. We will have a plenary for 1.5 hours. Then we'll break into 2 thematic sessions. The thematic sessions tomorrow are on food access, constraints, and facilitators, and addressing nutrition challenges in vulnerable population. That is the 5th thematic session. And the 6th thematic session is on nutrition knowledge and access to information. And the second one is digital innovation across food and health systems. We will have 3 learning labs tomorrow. 2 of them are in person, 1 is hybrid. And the plenary session is not a panel discussion, it's just a plenary closing and prize distribution. So we have kept more time for prize distribution this time. Hope to see all of you tomorrow at 9 a.m. One small last announcement that we have organized a conference networking dinner tonight. It is at the lawn where you all had lunch today. Since we are a little delayed in this session, instead of 6, I think we'll start that around 6:30, 6:45. So request all of you if you can join us for the networking dinner at the lawn at around 6:45 p.m. Thank you so much and see you all tomorrow.